Any thoughts, anybody?
I like the idea of the 3 with the asterisk, and then towards the bottom, that only hasn't been a point of emphasis that I can recall in recent times, but e-commerce fulfillment centers, I think it's those kinds of things that we don't necessarily think of on a regular basis as long as the packages get delivered correctly, but those have to happen, somewhere, and then there might be different business models as the e-commerce evolves, where there might be smaller distribution centers located within city limits in ways we can't currently foresee early in 22, but it might be an issue in 24 or 25, who knows? And so I think seeing where the future of retail and online shopping is going, it might be good to, just proactively, put that into, a work session.
Yeah, there was an article in a recent, I think it was the Michigan Planning Magazine, about e-commerce impacts. And with the discussion on GoPuff last year, in particular, I thought it was timely to discuss how the code responds to that emerging land use.
Yeah, I suppose with the GoPuff thing, it starts blurring the line between, how much is retail versus just basically an e-commerce platform. So I think that would be a good discussion to have in a future work session.
Jacob, for home occupation standards, were you thinking just reviewing the list, or?
Yeah, that's actually an item that's called out in the master plan. And so if that was something you wanted to discuss, I would likely just bring forward the current text and see if there's any adjustments that you wish to make. Generally speaking, the city's home occupation standards are fairly liberal compared to most communities. And they're essentially the same home occupation standards we've had going back to 1984. So I don't think there's a pressing urgency to necessarily loosen the rules. There's some communities that have very strict home occupation rules that are probably out of step with today's work from home type world. But nevertheless, given the change in the way people work and do business, it also would be timely, like e-commerce centers, to be thinking about that in the near term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I might be interested in looking at that one too.
I would say from our last meeting, I know we did a special use permit for a daycare. And I know a couple people had spoken and saying that our area is like very low when it comes to daycare and home care centers. So I do think that it's something important that we should look at just for future meetings, is
Jacob, I have a question. Did we have anything that came up when we were looking at the master plan that were buffer standards that we were looking at moving to versus what we currently use?
For the CD3L and CD3, that objective, I believe, just came out of general public feedback about neighborhood impact of adjacent businesses. I know that it's been I think historically it's been more sensitive than average in Mount Pleasant because of the configuration of the Mission Street corridor. There's not a lot of land space between adjacent residences and high impact business types. And so getting those buffers right is important and not always easy under those limitations. And so I think this was simply an opportunity to review and see if those were still appropriate or if there was any need for there to be any change to the way in which we implement those buffers.
Can you tell me a little bit about like the registered student organization dwelling locations and all that? Like what would that entail?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So registered student organization dwellings are very limited in terms of the geography in which they can locate within the city. And we have a number of registered student organization dwellings that are located primarily north of High Street, on Maine, Washington, or University that have been they were created in a period between 1971 and 1984 when the city allowed them in that area. And then since 1984, they've been non-conforming. And so there's been an ongoing dialogue about whether or not that non-conforming status is appropriate. I receive a lot of every year I receive at least a couple inquiries from registered student organization groups that are looking for new housing opportunities. And there's just not a tremendous amount of availability for new housing opportunities in the area in which they're allowed to be located. And so that creates a challenge for them. It's partly, I will say, it's partly self-imposed because, and understandably, they want to be near other Greek organizations. These are primarily Greek organizations. They want to be near each other. And so they kind of self-limit where they're willing to locate. And then we also have a geographic limitation imposed. And so this was just simply an opportunity to talk about those regulations and see if there might be some options to work through that. I've had conversations with the Greek Life office at CMU multiple times over the past few years to try to solicit their interest in being part of that conversation. One of the challenges with this is that office has a lot of turnover, and the organizations themselves, obviously the students turnover every couple of years. And so we're kind of always working with a new group of people, but I think it's one that would be important, and in light of enrollment, being supportive of those student organizations and encouraging them seems to be something the university is supportive of. So that's kind of where that was oriented towards.
Okay, thank you.
Without pretending to understand completely what the floating overlay district point is there, and nevertheless, from what I know about it, seems to be supportive of easier business establishment here in the city. And this is with regards to the recent press from Mr. Engler and our old friend Mike about the need to attract businesses here. So to the extent that one might make it easier for businesses to reestablish or to relocate here, to locate here, I would think that's probably smart for us to look at.
Any other thoughts? Hearing none, I guess we can move
I think we're at 8, and we probably won't have 8 work sessions this year. We usually don't in December. Next month, we'll likely be discussing a referral from the city commission about drive-through restaurant stacking. And so I will work through this list and put together a tentative schedule for your consideration in March, and we will move forward from there.
Jacob, are we definitely getting that from the city commission about this drive-through stacking?
I'm sorry, definitely what?
Is that coming through next month, definitely, or?
They made the referral at their last meeting.
They did, okay.
For it to be discussed at your March meeting. So, yep, that will be on your agenda for next month for discussion only.
on the regular agenda or a work session?
Probably work session agenda. The only action that's being requested is for the planning commission to identify options.
Okay.
So I think we can handle that through general feedback provided through a work session format. Unless the planning commission would prefer that it be on the regular agenda, but ultimately the only action you could take would be to discuss the item.
And yeah, that sounds like a work session type item then. Any further discussion? Anyone like to move to adjourn the meeting?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.
They give you a gavel? Yeah. mean, if you got it, might as well use it, right?